Parshat Ekev poses for us the great question: what is the real challenge of a free society? And in this week's parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu springs the great surprise. And let us see his words. Be careful that you don't forget the Lord your God. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. If you ever forget the Lord your God, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Now, what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, and it is really something very surprising, is he is turning to the new generation and saying, you thought 40 years in the wilderness were the real trial. And now you're going to enter the land of Israel and everything will be easy. He said exactly the opposite is the case. The real challenge isn't poverty. The real challenge is affluence. It is when you settle down, when you don't have huge challenges, when you grow well off, that is when you are in greatest danger. That is when the spiritual trial will really begin. Now, what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing here is something very interesting that doesn't happen very often. And it happens only to certain very outstanding historical scholars in the course of civilization. One of the first was the great Islamic 14th century teacher called Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun gave an overarching theory of the decline and fall of civilizations. We know that all civilizations, all great civilizations, begin, by military victory, by being very powerful or very energetic or very driven. Then they settle down, then they become affluent, and then they begin to lose what he called asabiya, which is the Arabic word for what we would call social cohesion. People begin to get more interested in themselves, and they stop worrying about their neighbors and the good of other people, and they stop worrying about the poor. And that is when they lose social cohesion. When that happens, they're no longer able to win battles, and they lose their battles to people who are less affluent and more driven. So that was the first great historian of the decline and fall of civilizations. The second was the Italian scholar Giambattista Vico, who wrote in the early 18th century, very, very profound thinker, an absolute one-off in Western culture, who, in a book of his called The New Science, again drew this picture of the sequence that every civilization goes through. His way of putting it is, first people worry about what's necessary, then they worry about what's useful, then they attend to their comfort, then they start delighting in pleasures, then they start concentrating on luxuries, which leads them to become dissolute, and finally they go mad, squandering their estates. They get into a situation like America and Britain at the moment. They build up huge levels of personal debt. They spend tomorrow and weaken themselves today. The latest person to do so is none other than our Scottish professor of history at Harvard, Niall Ferguson, who in his latest book, Civilization, says that the West had 6 killer apps or applications which made their program work better than anyone else's program. They were competition, science, democracy, medicine, consumerism, and the work ethic. Those 6 things made the West beat everyone else, but today the West is in danger of losing them. And all of this was said for the first time by Moshe Rabbeinu, millennia before anyone else. Number one, if you grow affluent, you may forget where you came through, where you came from, and all the battles you had to fight to get where you are. When you forget about your past and you concentrate only on the present, then inequalities grow. A few people get mega rich and a whole lot of people get mega poor. When that happens, there's a loss of social cohesion. People don't really care about the welfare of other people. And when that happens, society grows weaker. And when that happens, there is eventually defeat and devastation. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, the real challenge isn't poverty, the real challenge is affluence. So how do you defeat what scientists call entropy, which says that all systems lose energy over time? Can you create a society that is capable of defeating the normal laws of the decline and fall of civilization? It never happened. Could it happen? And Moshe Rabbeinu is really setting out this program in Devarim of a society that will never grow old. The first thing you have to do, he says throughout Devarim, is never forget who you are and where you came from. You were Avodim Hayinu Levarav Mitzrayim. We remember the past. We were all once slaves. We shared a fate, so we should care about one another. Number two, create a society where there's justice, where there's the rule of law, where people feel that everyone is behaving responsibly, where there is genuine provision for people who are poor, and where everyone has dignity. And thirdly, recognize a power greater than yourself. Always remember that it is God who led you to where you are, and it is God that you have to serve. Because in the long run, the only alternative to serving God is serving yourself. And when a society is full of people serving themselves, it ceases to be a society. So we see that Moshe Rabbeinu is putting forward a thesis which is as new as this year and Niall Ferguson's new book, Civilization. Let me just quote to you one little wonderful example from towards the end of Niall Ferguson's book. He says, and this is a most unlikely source because don't forget, China was a radically secular communist regime, and Chairman Mao said 50 years ago, we have made China religion-free. Towards the end of his book, Civilization, Niall Ferguson talks about a member of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences who said that we were set the problem by the government. Find out what made the West beat us in everything, because China was ahead of the West until the 15th century. It invented all sorts of things before the West did, but somehow from the 15th century onwards, the West started gaining on China and overtook it. And the scholar said, at first we thought the West was won because it had better guns than we did. It had better military, it could shoot better. Then we studied a bit deeper and we said, no, the reason the West won is it has a better political system than we had. It has democracy. And then he said, no, we studied further and we realized that the reason the West was successful is because it had a better economic system than we had. It was the free market that led to democracy, that led to better guns. He said, but for the last 20 years, we've realized the real answer. It's your religion. And this in China, the most secular of all states, which is now rapidly becoming religious, incidentally. So here it is. It is actually religion, faith in God, belief in a power greater than yourselves. That is the only thing that actually allows nations to defeat the decline and fall that happens to every great society. Or, in simple words, a society is as strong as its faith. That was what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the Israelites before they entered the land. It still remains true today. Shabbat Shalom.